Meet Chuck Johnson, a professional stuntman and entrepreneur living in Japan. Chuck has been living in Japan for 19 years, and today he runs a Taekwondo school, a fitness company called Strong Body Japan, and a film production company called Quiet Flame. This is Chuck's story. Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another episode of the Melanated Files. My name is Ranzan. Today we're joined by Chuck Johnson, stuntman and entrepreneur right here in Tokyo, Japan. He's been in Japan for over 18 years, 19 years actually, right?
Yeah, 19 years.
So he has a really fascinating and interesting story. We're going to get into that story right now. Remember to subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. Chuck, please introduce yourself to the world. Tell them who you are.
So my name's Chuck Johnson. I'm a stuntman. As Ronzo said, I'm also an entrepreneur. I've been based in Japan for about 18, 19 years, but I've been in Asia for even longer than that, actually. I've been about at least half my life. Originally, I'm from Detroit, Michigan, but I also grew up a little bit in Lansing, Michigan as well.
So you've been in movies?
Yes.
Right, so in Japan as well?
Yes.
So we're gonna start from the beginning. So tell me why Asia?
Okay, it's a long story. Basically, the first sport that I ever got into was Olympic Taekwondo. I started Taekwondo when I was 15. It was the first thing I'd ever done, and it was the first thing that I was ever good at, really. You know, so I mean, when I started Taekwondo, I was kind of like a C average student, you know, and then by the time I graduated high school, I had all A's.
Okay.
You know, and within 2.5 years, I got my black belt. 6 days after that, I was a Michigan State champion. And then I just had all these, you know, big dreams of going to the Olympics and whatnot. So originally I went to Korea so that I could train. Because I wanted to go to the Olympics. So I'm like, and at that time, you know, there was a huge difference between Taekwondo in Korea and Taekwondo in the rest of the world. Because the goal was the 2000 Olympics, you know. So, you know, at least at that time, you know, the average high school level Taekwondo player was about as good as like national level players in the States. So I went to Korea to train with a high school team, you know, and even then these guys were just monsters, right? So I was in Korea for 3-4 years, went back to the States, won 2 non-Olympic qualifying national championships. But really what it came down to was when I started this journey, I just loved Taekwondo, and I just wanted to master it because I loved it, and I just wanted to be as good as I could be. But I had no idea just how much and how many resources it takes to produce an Olympian. Okay. I just didn't know, you know. So I was just out there on my own, by myself, just trying to train everywhere I could and doing all this stuff. And you know, I'm not unhappy with how that whole career turned out. You know, and I had some really good experiences. You know, I learned to speak Korean, which I still speak. You know, I mean, I've just had a bunch of like amazing cultural experiences in Korea and all that. But by the time I was about maybe 23, 24, I just had to make a choice because I was like, all right, well, I'm in my mid-20s, and if I'm really, really, really going to do this Olympic thing, I can't do anything else in my life, you know. And after having been abroad and seeing what the outside world was like, and seeing how much of the world there is, I had to think, all right, do I really want to be 30 years old and only know Taekwondo? You know, and the answer was no. You know, I wanted to know so much more, you know, and even while I was in Korea, sometimes I went and I volunteered in Thailand. Like I lived in a Buddhist temple for a few weeks, and helping the abbot with community service work, and you know, at another point I worked on a cruise ship, you know, also as a volunteer doing like kind of cross-cultural exchanges and sports exchanges and things like that. Okay. And there was too much world for me to only know one thing. You know, it was just the world was too big, right? So then I thought, all right, well, I've got all this really high level martial arts experience. What do I do with it? You know, so what's going to be the next step? You know,
still mid-20s. You're still in mid-20s.
Yeah. So then I thought, all right, well, okay. I also really love to study, so I thought, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll try to get into, you know, a PhD program at UC Berkeley because they had the best collegiate Taekwondo program in the country, in the States at the time. But I thought, well, at this point, you know, I've pretty much exhausted all of my resources. You know, I had a friend, one of my best friends from Korea at the time, he had come to Japan to teach English. So I thought, all right, well, let me just do this teaching English in Japan thing for a year, and then just pay off some debt, save up a little bit of money before I go back to the States and go to school. Okay. And then I came here, and then I just never. We're just like, that's what happens to everybody, right? You're like, I'm gonna come for a year, I'm gonna teach English, I'm gonna make some money, and then I'm gonna go home. And that just never ever.
This is very true. Why?
Everybody.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know, man. I think it's a lot of things. You know what I mean? Like it's safe here, it's clean here, and for me, it was opportunity. You know, like as soon as I showed up in Tokyo, I was just like, yo, like there was so much stuff that you could do here, you know? And then like one of the first things that happened after I arrived, like within, you know, a week and a half of arriving here, I was at a party and I met this guy and he's like, you look really strong. What do you do? And I said, oh, I'm a Taekwondo guy. And he said, oh, okay, I'm a Taekwondo guy too. We should fight. Because, you know, that's what you do, right? Like as like one martial artist, you need another one. The first thing you want to do is you want to fight him. Okay. Like, all right, yeah, let's go fight. So I fought him. He's like, you're really strong. You should bodyguard with me. And I'm like, all right, well, who do you bodyguard? And he's like, well, I bodyguard celebrities. Okay. And I'm just like, all right, well, this is interesting. Let's run with this and let's see where this goes.
So were you teaching yet in Japan? Or you were just here?
I had just gotten like an English teaching job.
Ah, okay.
Like, I mean, I literally just like learned how to
day 7. So
yeah, this is like day 7.
Okay.
Right? Okay. So then I just got this English teaching job, you know, and this was day 7, and this dude's like, yeah, you should bodyguard with me. And I'm like, well, that sounds pretty cool.
Japanese guy?
Yeah, he's Japanese.
Okay.
So he went on to be one of my best friends as well for a very long time. And bodyguarding is something I still do, you know, every once in a while. So, you know, and like when I left to come here, who would have thought I'd end up being a celebrity bodyguard? You know, and at this point, like I work for a range of different people. I can't, you know, out of respect for the clients that I work for, I can't say who they are.
So English teacher by day, bodyguard by night.
Among other things. Among like 50 other things, right?
Okay.
But yeah, that was and that was like a week after I got here. And then partially because at the time, you know, there was so few people that looked like me and who were my size and who were just big, right? Like
2001.
Yeah, it was 2001. So there was just like all kinds of opportunities, you know, and then getting into action movies happened, I think, maybe 2 years after that. And then I was like, okay, this action movie stuff's cool. Let me run.
So tell me about that. So what was the transition? How did that happen?
Okay.
Movies.
Okay. So basically, you know, at the time I was still teaching English, and then I was also bodyguarding, and then I just needed a way to make more money because like I built up a lot of debt trying to do the Olympic thing because I was going back and forth to Korea. I was funding everything on my own. I was taking out loans, so I just built up a lot of debt. So I was like, man, I need to make more, you know. So then a friend of mine was like, well, you're really tall and you're muscular. You should get into modeling. So I was like, okay, well, yeah, let's run with that. Let's see where that goes. So then I walked into a modeling agency, and then I said, yeah, okay, so I want to model. And they're like, all right, well, what are you good at? And I was like, well, I'm pretty good at martial arts. And they're like, are you a champion? And I'm like, yeah, kind of. And then they're like, all right, well, we're casting for a Godzilla movie right now. This is the last 30 minutes of the casting process.
Wow.
Do you want to audition? And I'm like, yeah, all right, let's do it. And I didn't have any photos or anything. So they're like, all right, well, let's go outside. So I took my shirt off and I went outside and we're taking like flying kick photos and there's a wedding happening in the background and stuff. But we get one good photo of me doing a flying kick. We send it in and then they're like, all right, yeah, send him for an audition. Auditioned, got into the film. And then from there, I ended up meeting a Japanese action director who was up and coming. And then I said, this action stuff is amazing. How do I continue? And he said, well, why don't you come and you train with me and my stunt team? So then I started training with this Japanese action director, named Shimamura Yuji, and his stunt guys, and another one by the name of Ohara Go. And then I just started training with these guys, and then from there, everything just kind of expanded out into everything that it is now.
So were you speaking Japanese at the time?
Not at all.
So did they speak English?
Not at all.
So how did you communicate? How did that go?
Whole lot of gestures. Well, there was one person.
Because no Google Translate.
Yeah.
There's no translation.
Yeah, there was nobody to translate, and it's like, all right, well, there's this guy here, and he doesn't speak Japanese, but he seems to really want to do this. And I guess at the time they could just see that I was trying, and they respected the fact that I was going for it.
Wow.
So
language never stopped you.
Yeah, the language didn't. And the language came. And my Japanese was very, very rough for a very long time.
Okay.
I only knew half the colors, and I knew the word for left and not the word for right, and this kind of stuff, because I was just learning to speak it just from using stuff all the time. So I only knew the words that I was using. Right?
Yeah. When did you decide to leave English teaching and start your own companies? So tell me about that. But before even that, what movies were you in?
I've done quite a lot. So the first film that I did was called Godzilla Final Wars, but I actually don't want anybody to watch that. That was a bad movie, but it was my first one, right? So I wasn't hitting my marks and
everyone's gonna look it up.
Shouldn't even say anything, right? Yeah, so that was the first film. The next one after that, the first one that I got through my stunt team was called Death Trans. I also did the motion capture for Metal Gear Solid 5.
Okay.
So I'm in the game. I was in another game called Left Alive. Left Alive was interesting because I was 3 of the characters in the game.
Okay.
Which was really cool. I think that was one of my coolest career highlights because I was playing 3 different characters. I actually had a conversation with myself and then I shot myself in the head, which was cool. So I was this guy, this guy shoots this one in the head, and then this one falls and dies.
Okay.
And both sides are me. And that was one of the coolest and funnest things that I've done in my career. I also worked in my first big Hollywood blockbuster just this past February. And unfortunately, I don't think I can talk about it just yet. I really, really want to. I'm dying to talk about it. But and I did that with my stunt team. So it wasn't just me, but I got to actually bring some of my people with me, which is really awesome and really cool and rewarding and exciting.
Tell me about the industry, being a black man, right? So in that industry, tell me about that in the beginning. So when you first started with Godzilla, what was the experience like being a black man in Japan at that time? Tell me about that experience.
I think the thing that's interesting about being black in Japan is that as an African American, a lot of the times people's perception of you is already kind of loaded. You know what I mean? And it's certainly not everybody, right? But sometimes you meet people and it's they already have an idea as to what you are, or they already have kind of ideas as to what you would like or what you would find offensive and all this stuff. And it may or may not be accurate, but when they meet you, they've already got this preconception in their head, right? Whereas for myself here, and I don't know what your experience has been like, but for most Japanese people, when they meet you, you're just a question mark. You know what I mean? You're this completely enigmatic thing that they've never seen before. And at first they're kind of all right, what is this? What is this? What am I looking at, right? And then you start to talk to them, and they're oh, okay, yeah, he's really nice.
It does, or it
and then and then everybody's so happy because they're wow, he's so easy to talk to, and he speaks Japanese, and yeah, right. So I think it's just kind of a different experience, And I think really, even when you are in the States, a big part of that is even when people have those preconceptions, you just show them that they may not necessarily apply. You know, and I think you just gotta just be real. You just stay real polite to people, and you're nice, and you're easy to get along with. And then even people that have perceptions, even when they're negative perceptions, oftentimes you can change those perceptions.
Okay.
You know, and like I've had that experience a lot as well, right? So I think really it's just all about being a positive, easy to get along with, hard-working person, and everybody respects that.
Okay.
You know.
What about the transition from your initial, because day 7 in Japan, you got an opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? You never spoke the language, and now it's 19 years in. Has your experience changed? Did you have any preconception in the beginning that changed over time?
The interesting thing about this whole journey, and this is something that we spoke about a little bit earlier, is that I think to a large degree, one of the reasons that I've had this experience that I had in Japan was because when I started, I had no idea how hard it was going to be. Right? Just like when I decided that, like, all right, yeah, this Olympics thing, I'm going to go to the Olympics because obviously I'm really good at this Taekwondo stuff. I can do it. Right? And I just didn't know how hard it was going to be and how the kind of adversity that you're going to face. You know, and then once I got into the industry, you know, as Japan's first kind of full-time stunt person living here.
Foreigner?
Yeah, as its first foreign stunt guy, basically. You know, there was another person here by the name of Ruben Langdon, who's also a very good friend of mine. He was kind of Japan's first stunt guy, but Ruben was working here in Hong Kong at the same time.
Okay.
But I was Japan's kind of first fully committed, you know, completely living here stunt guy.
Okay.
You know, and then when I got into it, there was zero work at all because there was nobody else. There was nobody here, you know, so no one even had the idea that there would be a foreign person that could do fight choreography, you know, or and that could act as well. And obviously, like, acting is something that I had to study and it's something that I had to learn, you know, but people just didn't know that there was anybody here, so there was no work at all.
Okay.
And then through Shimamura-san, I got my first big opportunity through the film Death Trance, and then people started saying, oh, okay, there's a guy. You know, there's a guy that can do that. Okay, and then what I started to think is that, like, all right, right now there is no work doing this at all, but if I can hang in there and I just keep training and I get good, then that means when I get there will be no competition. And that is kind of how the transition happened. And it got to the point where, like, for a long time, I was the only guy here and everybody knew who I was. So, you know, it didn't matter what the role was. Like, I would just get it. They were like, all right, well, let's see. We need, you know, a 60-year-old kind of overweight white dude to play Santa Claus, but we don't have that, so let's just use Chuck. And it was just like that all the time. They're like, you know, I would just get contacted for the craziest stuff, and I'm like, that just doesn't fit me at all. But if you're going to pay me,
I'll take it.
all right, let's do it. You know, and that's just kind of how it was.
So what was the transition from English teaching to, you know what, I want to start a business, right? So one of your companies is called...
Quiet Flame Production.
And the second one is?
Strong Body Japan.
Okay, so tell me about how you started those companies.
Okay.
What was the impetus?
Okay, so basically there was, for a huge part of my career, you know, I mean, English teaching was always there. You know, it was always there.
Yeah, the foundation.
Yeah, it was the foundation, and it was just kind of like, it was the survival money, right? You know, and even now, actually, like I created kind of the English training curriculum for the Tokyo Fire Department.
Okay.
You know, well, I can't say I created the whole thing, but I had a big part of that, and, you know, and I still do teach at the University that trains paramedics, and I do things. I do things at the Tokyo Fire Academy, and then also for Kyoto University that trains paramedics. But largely, it's because I think it's just important.
Okay.
You know, it's important, meaningful work. Because, you know, I mean, obviously paramedics need to speak English because, like, foreigners get in trouble too. Yeah. You know, so I mean, that's why and at the time the Olympics was coming as well. So, you know, that's
still coming.
Still coming. Yes, it's still coming. 2021. So I mean, I still do that, but that's pretty much the only English teaching I do. And like I said, it's largely just because I think it's meaningful and important work.
Indeed.
But basically, the English teaching was just kind of my baseline income for a long time, and then I was also always just doing entertainment work. And the way that it panned out was that basically, because I was the only guy, they're like, all right, well, we need a bad guy for this movie, but and we need him to be able to do fight choreography, but, you know, obviously I'm not going to get a stunt double. So for my entire career, I was always an actor and a stunt person.
Okay.
And I always had to be able to do both. You know, so it just put me into this kind of like weird position where I've never exclusively been one or the other. I was always doing stunt work, doing acting work, doing stunt work, doing acting work. Then half the time I was a bad guy that was doing all their own fight scenes. You know, because that's just, you know, that was the only way to get it done. Yeah, so what happened with the transition into starting Quiet Flame Productions was because it got to the point where, you know, all these directors and all these producers knew me. And then they were like, Chuck, do you have anybody else? Chuck, do you have anybody else? You know, and then I'm like, well, no, I actually don't have anybody else, but maybe I should have other people. You know, so then at that point, you know, now I also teach at the International Stunt School in Seattle during the summers, which is kind of one of, if not probably the biggest stunt school in the States. It's one of the stunt, personally, I think it's one of America's best stunt training programs. And I'm their fight choreography instructor.
Okay.
So, or the East Asian style fight choreography instructor. Right. So basically I had a few students who had graduated from there that said like, I want to come to Japan. And I'm like, all right, then come. You know, so then I had a few students from Canada who came. And then all of a sudden, you know, I started having the beginning of a team. You know, and then from there, then because of the size of my YouTube channel and the success of my YouTube channel, YouTube gave me the opportunity to produce a film. And they're like, you know, we noticed kind of the level, the rate that your YouTube channel's growing at. And for strong YouTubers, we got this film where you can get access to a full like jidaigeki. Jidaigeki is kind of like the old period samurai dramas. They said, we're going to give you full access to a jidaigeki set. What can you do with it? So then I was like, all right, well, this is interesting. Let's run with this. So then I wrote a script, and then I contacted a filmmaker whose short film I had seen, another African-American guy by the name of Brian Parker. And at the time I contacted, I didn't even know he was black. I just saw his short movie and just thought it was a cool film. It was funny. So then I reached out to him, and I'm like, listen, bro, I saw this movie that you made, and I'm in Japan right now, and I'm wondering if you want to fly into Japan to make a movie. And then he's like, who is this guy? So then he contacted some mutual friends and like, hey, have you ever heard of this guy, Chuck? And everybody's like, oh yeah, Chuck, yeah, Chuck's a good guy. So then he came out.
Okay.
And then I had another buddy named Wadi. Wadi also teaches with me at the stunt school. So then Wadi just happened to be in Japan because he was teaching breakdancing. Okay. So then I'm like, listen, Wadi, I'm making a film. Do you want to come to Tokyo and then do the choreography? And he's like, yeah, let's do it. So then this whole film, which was called Fists of Absinthe, just ended up...
And it's on your YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, it's on my YouTube channel.
Okay.
Fists of Absinthe. But this whole film, it just kind of snowballed into this really big thing. And then we ended up getting kind of like sponsorship from Adidas. Because the story revolves around like this dude trying to protect his sneakers from like samurai and ninja, right? So then Adidas ended up getting involved. And then after Adidas got involved, and then Google was on board, and then it just kind of grew organically into this really big thing that ended up getting a nationwide distribution deal with TBS Digital in Japan.
Oh, wow.
え、何それ知らないのこれはアブセンスだぞ
But it ended up being like a short movie. There's a Japanese movie starring a black dude, you know, like a samurai movie. They got a nationwide distribution deal. So then from Fist of Absinthe, then all of a sudden it's like, all right, so now I've got a stunt team, and now I can produce movies. So now I guess it's just time to make a company.
Okay.
You know, so then from that came Quiet Flame Productions. You know, and then it just grew into this thing where like, and at the time I'd also started teaching Taekwondo because I had put so much of my life into getting good at it, and I just didn't want to lose the skill. So I thought, all right, well, you know, I'll just start teaching Taekwondo just to kind of grow my skill. And then I just had a dojang that just started growing and growing and growing and growing. And the goal for Quiet Flame, you know, the reason that it's called Quiet Flame is because I think if you look at fire, right? Like fire it can be an incredible resource. You know, it's something that people will gather around to warm themselves by. And it's something that you can cook your food with. It's just an amazing resource. But when it gets out of balance, it's chaos. And it burns everything to the ground and it destroys resources, right? So, you know, what we do at Quiet Flame is the idea of it is to help people to develop that balanced fire. You know, meaning through the training program, you know, we train people in acting and then action and stunts and sword work and martial arts and all that so that they can find their own quiet flame by studying all these different kinds of physical movement.
Was it challenging to start any of these companies for you as a foreigner?
Yeah, all of it was hard.
What was the most challenging part of it?
The hardest thing was that all of this stuff, I'd never done any of it. You know, like I, part of my degree was in business management, largely because when I was in college, I did every single study abroad program that you could to go to Korea. And then by the time I went back, they're like, you can't go to Korea anymore. You've taken all the classes. I'm like, what do you mean I'm taking all of it? And they're like, you don't have anything left to take. So then I was like, all right, well, what's the next closest country to Korea? And then they're like, well, Hong Kong. But you got to be a business guy. And I was like, all right, well, give me a business minor. So then I just added a business minor to my degree so I could go to Hong Kong because Hong Kong was close to Korea. And then I taught English at night. And then as soon as the semester finished, I went back to Korea to train again.
Okay.
So I ended up having to spend 6 months studying business and leadership and management.
Oh, okay. So you had that foundation.
So I had a little bit of a business foundation, but I didn't have any real experience in managing a team of people. Right? So naturally, you know, you just make mistakes. And then trying to kind of form a company here. So then, I mean, I had to figure out how to actually form a company and decide, you know, kind of what kind of corporate structure is best and you know, what the kind of vision of the company is. Because you got to think about all that stuff right at the beginning. You know, and like at the time, you kind of don't even know. Like you kind of half know all this stuff I had never done before. Like when I first started doing security, I had never done security before. I had to do all the training for the security in Japanese, and I didn't even speak Japanese yet. Wow. You know, so if you can imagine how complex that was. You know, the same when I was learning fight choreography. I started learning fight choreography, and I didn't, like, all I could do was watch and follow. And just kind of like gesture and be like, you mean like this, or you mean like this, you know, and like that kind of stuff, right? So it was just, I was always fighting against the language barrier, you know, and at the same time dealing with the limits of my own learning curve in terms of getting all this stuff to happen. But what happens is, like, the more and more you do that, like the faster your learning curve becomes. You know, like when I launched Strong Body Japan, you know, it was 5 times more efficient than launching
your second company.
Yeah, the second company.
So tell us about Strong Body Japan.
Okay, so Strong Body Japan it's functional fitness training. Okay, so the reason that I started Strong Body was because I was, you know, I'd been running Quiet Flame. I was teaching Taekwondo classes all the time. I was teaching action classes all the time. You know, and I was trying to take care of my son. And there was this one time where I just had a very, very tiring week, and then I wasn't sleeping at all, and I took him to the park, and then I'm like, all right, but we got to go home because Daddy's got to go teach Taekwondo. And he's like, I don't want to go home. And I'm like, bro, I got to teach. Come on, like, we got to go. So then finally, I just picked him up on one shoulder, picked up his bicycle and his diapers and all that on the other shoulder, and I carried him home with him fighting me the whole way for like 20 minutes. You know, and then the next day, I took him to school, took him out of his bike, put him down, and then went back home. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of weird. Oh, yeah, that's kind of uncomfortable. Up. And then, boom, I hit the floor, and then I ended up in the hospital.
Oh, snap.
with what's called a gikurigoshi in Japanese, which is just basically like I threw out my back.
Oh, snap.
And it was the most horribly intense pain I've ever had in my life. It was terrible. I mean, like 3 or 4 days I couldn't sleep. Like they were giving me horse tranquilizers.
Oh, snap.
Like it was awful. And the one thing that kept running through my mind is like, I'm supposed to be strong. How did this happen? How did this happen? Why did this happen? Right. And what I came to realize is that like even as an athlete, you know, who does push-ups all the time and this and that, you know, as you get older, you just lose core strength. It just happens. It happens to everybody, especially the strength in your back, you know, and you lose functionality of your muscle, right? So, and I thought, if as an athlete of 20 years or 25 years, if this can happen to me, then for sure this can happen to people who are just working regular jobs. And especially like parents of young children, you know, like, because you're always carrying stuff all the time, right? So anyway, long story short, what we do at Strong Body is it's training to increase functionality of muscles. The base of our education comes from the Institute of Human Performance in the States, which was rated as the #1 place for core training in the States. You know, the number one core fitness gym, and then the bands that we use are also considered the #1 resistance bands in the fitness industry as well, for just the quality. Like, but basically what we do is we put strength back into your muscles. You know, it's not about getting bigger or about body shaping and all that. It's about getting more bang for your buck out of the muscles that you have by systemic strengthening. You know, so for example, all of the exercises isn't about using one muscle at a time. It's about the connectivity between all of your muscles. So when you do it, you don't actually get very sore. So you feel like, well, I don't really do anything. But it's because the workload is distributed across the whole system. Right? So that's what Strong Body Japan does. You know, and like just last week, we did a workplace injury prevention seminar at the UFC gym to help people, you know, to learn the exercises that they need to do so that they don't get stiff shoulders and they don't get lower back injuries, which is something that happens to everybody who works at a desk. Right? You know, so other things we do is like I spent a month working with a guy who has, he's got arthritis in his hip. And the reason he had arthritis was because he spent a lifetime walking with one of his feet turned out like that, which means he was just using the kind of the balance within his system was just off. So muscles were being worked that weren't supposed to be being worked. And stress was being applied in places where it wasn't meant to be applied. So he ended up developing arthritis from it. And he's only like 50, and now he needs to get hip replacement surgery.
Oh, wow.
You know, and like we can't fix the arthritis, but what we can do is we strengthen all the muscles around that system so that there's less stress on the joint, so he's in less pain. And then when he does go in for his surgery, he's going to recover faster.
So what's your clientele like? Is it primarily Japanese people or a mix of foreigners and Japanese people?
Oh, it's both. Basically, it's anybody who has an athletic goal.
Okay.
You know?
How has your business been received in Japan since the inception?
Yeah. It's interesting because fitness in Japan is kind of young. So people don't, you know, a lot of people don't necessarily know much about fitness. And
people might find that statement strange, because even myself, because I think people have this perception that Japan, they're very fit. And like everyone seems to be like healthy and not fat. So that might be a misconception from an outsider looking in. So tell us about that.
But you know, part of the reason is because in general, eating here is so much healthier. You know, people generally they don't drink things with sugar in it. Food portions are small. People walk all the time. So like generally people they're just fit, but they don't really exercise. You know, a lot of people don't really know exercise and partially because of the language barrier, exercise science here is just a little bit behind because they don't have access to outside information because of the language barrier. Especially like, because, you know, when you're getting into talking about exercise, it's like, you know, physiology and muscles and bones and really specific language.
Okay.
You know, so that makes the language barrier even bigger within the exercise field. So one of the challenges of the SBJ is kind of people don't necessarily understand why they need it. You know what I mean? Or they don't understand like what it is or like why it's different, right? So that's one of the challenges that we're working to overcome And the easiest thing to do is be like, all right, well, first of all, what goals do you have as a person? You know, do you want to be able to pick up your kids and not get hurt? Or do you want to just avoid a back injury? Or are you a runner and you want to run faster? Like that frames it in a way that's it's easy for people to understand.
Mm-hmm. What's one lesson that grew out of your 19 years in Japan? So something that you learned from, you know, doing Taekwondo, doing all you did, because some people look at not being able to speak the language initially as some sort of impediment to doing something. You overcame all that, you started your own companies. Is there maybe one or two lessons that grew out of that experience that you can share?
I think the biggest thing that I could share with everybody is that, you know, you don't have to be the strongest and you don't have to be the toughest. You don't even have to be the smartest, right? Like a huge part of success, and this is something I learned as when I was trying to go to the Olympics, is that you have to be the person that outlasts everybody else. And that just keeps doing it after everybody else quits. You know, because when I was a fighter, like when I went to Korea, there was tons of other people in Korea who were trying to do what I was doing. But, you know, after time, like this person falls off because they run out of money, you know, or this person falls off because they get hurt, or this person falls off because they're just tired of just getting beat up. Because that's what happens when you want to be a good fighter, you just gotta get beat up a lot. You know, I mean, you just have to. So, I mean, it's just basically a lot of it comes down to one, hanging in there longer than everybody else has. You got to be able to take the punishment. And then two, not placing the blame on anybody else. Because at the end of the day, like, if you fail, you know, I mean, really, your success is on your shoulders. Always, you know? So, I mean, even if you fail, I mean, sure, something else might have triggered it. But at the same time, there was something that you could have done. So whenever you fail, the first thing you got to do is think, okay, what did I do wrong? How is this my fault? When I first started QF, our first iteration of the team that we had, I had really good people, but the team kind of fell apart anyway. Okay. You know, and there's reasons for that. You know, and like I said, some of it just came down to my own inexperience, you know, in dealing with people and managing people. But you have to look at the reasons that are your fault and not shy away from that or not place the blame on anybody else. Because even if it is somebody else's fault, like, they're not going to live your life for you. You know what I mean? Like, you got to take care of yourself, you know, and take your own responsibility for stuff, you know?
So what about, so two things. I want you to give me advice specific to Japan, your experience in Japan. Okay. Like what you learned being here. And the second one is, you said that you were pursuing being in the Olympics, right? Yeah. And then you sort of pivot, right? Yeah. So tell me about that specifically, where you were pouring everything you had into that pursuit, and then you reached a place where you're like, man, I want to do something else. Tell me about that the mindset that it took for you to make that change without maybe feeling emotionally maybe defeated or that type of feeling.
That was hard, because even then, like you like, whenever, you know, I mean, of course I still like watch Taekwondo videos all the time, and you watch it and you just still just want to fight. You know, you just want to, right? And you still, and I don't regret where I am right now at all, but that was still, you know, because when I was going for that, everybody who knew me knew I was going for that. You know, like everybody. So to have to go back and be like, well, yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore. You know, like, that's just not an easy thing, because it does feel like you're kind of giving up. You know. And you know, there's also the thing where, like, you know, you don't want it to look like, oh, well, he just gave up because it was too hard. You know. What
was the thing? Why did you stop and move to something else? What was it?
It was just that, like, I felt like at the end of the day, what do I really want to do with my life? You know, and what's the best way that I can make a positive social impact on society, right? So, and originally the goal was, okay, if I can do this Olympic thing, then I'll be in a position where there's a lot of different things that I can do for people. You know, I mean, I'm from Detroit. In Detroit, it's just a rough place. It's way better than it was, and it's getting better, largely because of the efforts of the people there. Okay. You know, I mean, the strength of Detroit is always its people, because Detroiters love Detroit. But it's still just a rough place, and there's a lot of things that need to be kind of fixed or need to be improved upon, you know. So originally one of the reasons that I wanted to go to the Olympics was to put myself into a position where I could really go back and do something, because there's a lot of people, and not just black kids, but just a lot of kids in general who just never ever get a chance.
Yeah.
You know, and I was just the lucky one in that I came from a 2-parent home, you know, and my parents worked their tails off so that I could get a chance to go to, you know, a private school instead of having to go to the Detroit public schools. And then so when we were in the middle school, I could move into a suburb and I could go to school in the suburbs. Like, that was their effort and their work. And that gave me an opportunity, you know. But a lot of other kids, man, like they don't have that, and it's not their fault. You know, I mean, it's just how the cards fell for them, right? So I kind of feel like, you know, if you're in this position where you can do things for people, you should. And that's what I really wanted to do with the Olympics. But at the same time, I thought, you know, is the Olympics the best way for me to do that? You know, and then based on how long it was taking me, and then based on my personality as well, and I thought, like, is being a fighter really the best use of the resources that God gave me? And then at the end of the day, the decision was no, it's not. It's not the best use of everything that I have.
Okay.
So then I just kind of, I didn't even, aside, like I said, I just came to Japan to teach English, just off of intuition. Like, all right, well, at this point, I've lived in Korea and I've lived in China, and I know what Asia looked like from a Korean perspective and from a Chinese perspective. You know, maybe the next thing is to just go to Japan and just see what Asia is like from a Japanese perspective.
Okay.
You know, and then while I'm there, I'll earn money, I'll learn stuff, and then I'll go back to the States being better educated.
What about lessons? You know, being in Japan for almost 2 decades, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would tell your younger self, like when you first came, any advice that you've learned now that you would say to Chuck back in 2001? So here's some advice to make your experience a lot better or easier.
Start with the language. For sure.
Okay.
For sure. Because you have a lot of people that come to Japan and they're like, yeah, like I want to do this and I want to do that, but they don't bother to learn Japanese. You know, and I mean, like, especially people working in entertainment. You know, I mean, like, if you could imagine somebody going to America and then being like, I want to be an actor. And then they're like, well, do you speak English? And they're like, well, no. I mean, come on, how much work are you really going to get?
Okay.
It's the same way in Japan, right? Like, if you really, really want to get somewhere here, I mean, you just got to dive into the language and just go. And really, I feel like you can't really understand Japan and understand Japanese people until you talk to them in their own language. Just because there's so much, like, just the philosophy of communication is so different. And you just can't get your head around it until you're actually in it. And after you speak Japanese people in Japan as a country makes 1,000,000 times more sense than when you only speak English. It makes so much more sense. And everything's so
the
much
culture
more.
is in the language itself as well, right?
Yeah, there's so much culture behind the language, you know. So I think if you really want to be successful here, you got to go hard into the language.
And so if someone is watching right now wanting to come to Japan, what advice would you give them?
The other advice I would give, and I mean, I think this applies to people anywhere, but in particular it applies to Japanese people, right? Is Japanese people love manner and quality.
Okay.
It's all about manner and quality, right? So, I mean, if you're very, very polite, you know, you're polite and you have very, very good social etiquette, and then you produce quality work, then, like, a lot of problems go away. You know what I'm saying? Like people are like, oh yeah, he's good. You know, even if they can't communicate with you cleanly, if they could see the quality of the work that you make, then people will like you and they'll respect you and they'll work with you. And if they could see that, like, you're a person who honestly cares about, you know, having good manner in everything that you do, and having, you know, strong etiquette, and just, you know, carrying yourself as a person of class. You know, I mean, a lot of times you hear people talk about racism in Japan. And racism in Japan, it's a thing. You know, I mean, it definitely is, and I've had my experiences, right? But, you know, regardless of where you're from, if you speak really good Japanese, and, you know, you're very, very polite, and you're just very good at what you do, then people always respect you.
Okay. Do you think is that something that grew out of your experience in Japan in terms of learning the etiquette, social etiquette in Japan? the mannerism, was it something that you had to learn, to experience, or you went out and you just tried to study it and figure out like how do they operate in Japan?
I was really lucky within the expat community. There's a lot of people who could see what I was trying to do.
Okay.
And then as a function of that, I ended up having mentors, which is another thing that if I could recommend for anybody who's trying to do anything, don't try and figure it out by yourself. If you can, get mentors. Mentors make a huge difference, right? I ended up having business mentors. And those business mentors went on to become the board of directors for Quiet Flame, actually.
Okay.
But one of them told me years and years ago, he says, Chuck, here it's all about quality. Just produce quality, get the details right, nail the details. They love details here. So just obsess about getting all the details right, and then it will just come. So he told me that, and then I just took it to heart, and then I just went hard.
What about family life in Japan, right? So
Yeah.
your son is 5 currently, right?
Yeah.
What's that like? Is he half?
Yeah, he's half. Yeah, he's half.
What's that experience like? Being a dad. What's that experience like? For you?
It's interesting because he's way more American than he is Japanese.
Okay.
And that's really unusual.
How did that happen?
I don't quite know, man. Like he's just he likes English programming and my wife, she's awesome in that she always speaks to him in English at home.
Okay.
Largely.
Okay.
Unless she's sleepy or she's irritated. then it's just Japanese. But that's the same with me, right? As soon as she's sleepy or irritated, it just goes right to the Japanese. So,
Yeah.
but generally we speak to him in English at home. He goes to school in Japanese.
Okay. Okay.
And, I spend a lot of time thinking about his future, and like trying to map out his course, and it's hard because it's like, all right, well, is he going to go to school in Japanese or is he going to go to school in English? Or is he going to, right now we're starting him off at a Japanese nursery school. Okay. And then he's going to go through elementary school in Japan or in Japanese. And then from there, we're going to switch to, we'd like to switch to an international school. Okay. If we can afford it and everything else, right? But, it is challenging. So, and it's definitely interesting. And then of course there's the whole cultural differences in terms of like what Americans value versus what Japanese people value, and what Americans think is really, really, really important for their children versus what Japanese people think is really important.
How is it navigating that?
Yeah, it's messy at times, but I think everybody's marriage is messy sometimes.
Marriages are messy.
Nobody gets away with that. Everybody gets to have a messy marriage, right? It's
territory.
Yeah, it is. But I think it's one of those things where like, what matters the most in terms of raising a child is just that you just care and that you're trying to do right by your kid. Even if you don't have all the resources in the world, and if you just genuinely care about your child's future and you try to do right by them, then I think everybody's kid's going to be fine.
All right. So what's next for you in Japan, right? So what's your ambition? You've been here for 19 years. What's next? What's your plan?
Okay. So, well, the biggest thing for this year, there's a few different things. I've always got like 7 different things on the back burner, right? But one of them is I would like to see Strong Body grow to the size that I think it deserves to be, because it's a beautifully elegant system of physical exercise, and it's super effective, right? So I would love to see that, and beyond that, I just think it genuinely makes a positive impact on people's lives. Because one of the things is that you think, as you get, because I'm 41, and as you get older, you tend to think that like having aches and pains in your body is just natural. It's like, well, I'm older, so things hurt. But if something hurts, it's because there's something wrong, and you can make that go away, and like a lot of the aches and pains that people have on a daily basis, they don't have to have, it's just a matter of just training. And you can't, fixing things in bones is hard, but most aches and pains actually come from soft tissue. Okay. And like, it comes from systemic weaknesses, either weaknesses in the system or imbalances in the system. And you can correct all that stuff. You know what I mean? And like, you can't make, as a 40-year-old, or 41-year-old, you know, there's only so much I could do about the pace that my muscles recover from. You know, recovery takes longer. Recovery from injury takes longer. But the strength that you have when you're in your 20s, you can totally get that back. Completely.
Okay.
You know, and it's the lack of strength that makes you feel old. You know, so I think that's something that through SBJ, we can give back to people, right? And then on the film front, the direction that I would like to head in is socially conscious film. You know, because like I mentioned earlier, I spent a long time as a volunteer. Like I volunteered in Thailand, and then you know, when I was working for Peace Boat, I sailed around the world twice. You know, I went to like maybe 35 countries. You know, and looking at all of the social issues and economic issues, and I think there's a lot of stories that need to be told. You know, so I mean, what I would really like to do with QF is to be able to address these stories that are important for people to know about, but to do it in the context of action cinema. Because everybody likes it when stuff blows up. You know, everybody loves car chases, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, I think if you look at like documentary films, documentaries are brilliant, but you have to be interested in it to watch it. You know, whereas like, I think you can do a lot for educating people on social issues, but doing it in the context where they're just watching something that they enjoy, which is people fighting and stuff getting blown up. And hopefully later on, like giant robots and all that other stuff that is you know, all the CG stuff that everybody loves now, right? So anyway, the direction I want to move in with Quiet Flame is going to be producing our own films. We've already got several scripts lined out, you know, and then Fist of Absinthe, the whole thing just happened, but it still worked out, you know, and if we can do that by accident, if we can make a really, really good film by accident, then for sure we can make one if we systematically sit down and plan it out and figure out all the details, and we do it systematically.
So where can people find you online?
Okay, that's I mean, we're on Instagram, and we're also on YouTube, and we got our own website. It's just Quiet Flame, www.quietflame.org is QF's website. SBJ is just strongbodyjapan.com.
Okay.
You know, and then also, you know, as QF has its own YouTube channel. I've got my own YouTube channel, which is just Chuck Johnson.
Okay.
Easy.
Okay, guys, so there you have it. This was Chuck Johnson, all right? So again, all the links to all his work and his companies are in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please give it a big thumbs up, and remember to subscribe to this channel for weekly videos on the Black experience across the globe. Until next time, bye for now.